It was supposed to be the perfect escape. A group of 5 friends, Mark, Sarah, Emily, Jake, and Lisa, had been planning a weekend trip to the beach for months. They had all been under a lot of stress from work and personal commitments, and this trip was a much-needed break. They chose a secluded beach known for its clear waters and tranquil beauty, far away from the hustle and bustle of city life. The day started beautifully. The sun was shining brightly, and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. They packed their car with all the essentials: food, drinks, beach chairs, and plenty of sunscreen, and set off early in the morning to make the most of their weekend. As they drove along the winding coastal road, the anticipation grew, and they chatted excitedly about their plans for the day. When they arrived at the beach, it was just as picturesque as they had imagined. The golden sand stretched out before them, and the gentle waves lapped at the shore. They quickly set up their spot, spreading out towels and setting up a small canopy for shade. It was the perfect day for relaxation and fun. Emily, the most adventurous of the group, was eager to get into the water. She loved swimming and had always been drawn to the ocean. As soon as they were settled, she stripped down to her swimsuit and ran towards the water, laughing and calling for the others to join her. Mark, Jake, and Lisa followed suit, while Sarah opted to stay on the shore and soak up the sun. The group spent the next few hours enjoying the beach. They swam, played beach volleyball, and lounged in the sun. Emily was in her element, swimming far out into the ocean and diving beneath the waves. She was an excellent swimmer, and the others admired her confidence and skill. As the afternoon wore on, the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting a warm, golden glow over the beach. The friends decided to take a break and have some snacks. They gathered under the canopy, laughing and talking about their plans for the evening. Emily, however, was still in the water, enjoying the last moments of daylight. After a while, Sarah looked out towards the ocean and realized she couldn't see Emily. She frowned and stood up, scanning the horizon for any sign of her friend. "Hey, where's Emily?" she called out to the others. Mark stood up and looked out over the water. "I saw her swimming just a few minutes ago," he said, his voice tinged with concern. "Maybe she went further out." Jake and Lisa joined them, their expressions mirroring Mark's worry. They called out Emily's name, but there was no response. The beach, which had been filled with laughter and joy just moments ago, suddenly felt eerily quiet. Panic began to set in as they realized that Emily was nowhere to be seen. Mark, Jake, and Lisa rushed into the water, swimming out to search for her, while Sarah stayed on the shore, shouting her name and scanning the horizon. They searched for what felt like hours, but there was no sign of Emily. The water was calm, and the beach was deserted, with no one else around to help. As the sun set and darkness began to fall, they were forced to abandon their search and return to the shore, their hearts heavy with fear and confusion. The friends quickly called the local authorities, who arrived at the beach within minutes. The police and Coast Guard launched a full-scale search, using boats and helicopters to scan the area. They questioned the friends about Emily's disappearance, trying to piece together what had happened. Mark, Sarah, Jake, and Lisa were distraught. They recounted how Emily had been swimming, how they had seen her just minutes before she disappeared, and how she was an excellent swimmer who wouldn't have ventured too far from the shore. The authorities took their statements seriously and continued the search well into the night. As the hours passed, hope began to fade. The authorities found no trace of Emily, no clothing, no signs of struggle, nothing to indicate what might have happened. The beach, once a place of joy and relaxation, had become a scene of tragedy and mystery. The friends were devastated. They returned to their hotel, unable to sleep, haunted by the image of Emily vanishing into the ocean. They sat in silence, each lost in their thoughts, trying to make sense of the inexplicable events. The next morning, the search resumed, but it yielded no new information. The authorities widened their search area, but still, there was no sign of Emily. The friends began to feel a growing sense of helplessness and despair. While the official search continued, the friends decided to seek help from the locals. They visited a small fishing village nearby, hoping to find someone who might have seen or heard something. The villagers were sympathetic, but had little information to offer. One old fisherman, however, seemed to know something. He listened to their story with a grave expression and then nodded slowly. "You say she was swimming far out in the ocean?" he asked, his voice rough with age. "Yes," Mark replied, desperation in his voice. "She loves swimming, but she wouldn't go too far. She knows her limits." The old man sighed and shook his head. "There's a legend around these parts," he said, his eyes dark and serious. "They say there's a sea witch who lives in these waters. She lures swimmers with her song and drags them down to the depths. Those who see her never return." The friends exchanged uneasy glances. "A sea witch," Jake repeated, his voice incredulous. "That sounds like a fairy tale." The fisherman shrugged. "Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But many have disappeared in these waters over the years. Strong swimmers, just like your friend. No trace, no bodies, nothing. Just ... gone." The story sent chills down their spines. Could there really be something supernatural at play? The idea seemed absurd, but the fisherman's conviction and the eerie coincidences were hard to ignore. Determined to find answers, the friends decided to return to the beach that evening. They hoped to find some clue, some sign of Emily that the authorities might have missed. As night fell, they gathered their flashlights and headed back to the shore. The beach was even more deserted and eerie at night. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore seemed louder, and the moon cast long, dark shadows across the sand. The friends walked along the water's edge, calling out Emily's name and shining their flashlights over the waves. As they reached the spot where Emily had last been seen, a strange feeling came over them. The air grew cold, and an unnatural stillness settled around them. They felt a presence, something watching them from the depths of the ocean. Suddenly, they heard a soft, melodic voice singing from the water. It was hauntingly beautiful and eerily familiar. The friends froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. The song seemed to beckon them, drawing them closer to the water. Mark, unable to resist the pull of the melody, waded into the ocean, his eyes fixed on the dark water. "Emily," he called out, his voice trembling. "Is that you?" The singing grew louder, more insistent. The friends watched in horror as a figure began to emerge from the water. It was a woman, her hair flowing like seaweed, her eyes dark and empty. She was beautiful, yet terrifying, with an otherworldly aura that sent chills down their spines. "Mark!" "Get back," Sarah screamed, but he seemed entranced, unable to move. The figure reached out a hand, beckoning Mark to come closer. He took another step, the water now up to his waist. The friends rushed to pull him back, but the woman's gaze held him captive. Just as it seemed Mark would disappear into the water, the woman let out a chilling scream and vanished beneath the waves. The spell was broken, and Mark stumbled back to shore, gasping for breath. The friends were shaken to their core. They had seen something impossible, something that defied all logic and explanation. They knew they had encountered the sea witch, and that Emily's disappearance was no ordinary accident. The encounter with the sea witch left the friends traumatized. They returned to their hotel, their minds reeling from what they had witnessed. They spent the night discussing their options, trying to decide what to do next. They knew they couldn't leave without finding some way to understand what had happened to Emily. The next day, they sought out the old fisherman again. They told him about their encounter, hoping he could provide some insight. The fisherman listened intently, his expression grave. "You saw her, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low. "The sea witch." Mark nodded, still shaken. "Yes, we saw her. She ... she tried to take me." The fisherman sighed deeply. The sea witch preys on those who are vulnerable, those who have a strong connection to the ocean. Your friend Emily, she must have caught her attention. The witch lures them in with her song and takes them to her realm beneath the waves. The friends were silent, absorbing the fisherman's words. "Is there any way to get Emily back?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with desperation. The fisherman shook his head. "Once the sea witch has taken someone, they are lost to our world. But you can protect yourselves. Avoid the water at night and never answer her call." It was a bitter pill to swallow, but the friends knew they had to accept it. They thanked the fisherman and returned to the beach one last time to say their goodbyes to Emily. The friends held a small memorial for Emily on the beach, lighting candles and sharing their favorite memories of her. It was a somber, emotional moment, but it brought them some closure. They knew Emily was gone, but she would always be in their hearts. As they left the beach, they made a pact to cherish their time together and to always remember Emily's adventurous spirit. The trip had changed them forever, leaving them with a deeper understanding of the mysteries of the world and the fragility of life. They returned to their normal lives, carrying the memory of that fateful weekend with them. They stayed in touch, supporting each other through the difficult times and keeping Emily's memory alive. Years later, they would often talk about that weekend and the encounter with the sea witch. It remained a mystery, a story they could never fully explain. But it had brought them closer together, and they knew that Emily would have wanted them to live their lives to the fullest. The Thompson family, consisting of John, his wife Mary, and their two children, 16-year-old Anna and 10-year-old Billy, had been looking forward to their summer vacation for months. After a particularly stressful year, they decided to rent a vacation home near the coast, where they could relax and enjoy some quality family time. John had found a quaint house close to an old, abandoned lighthouse, and the picturesque location seemed perfect for their needs. The drive to the vacation home was filled with anticipation. The coastal road wound through scenic landscapes, with the sea glistening under the bright sun. When they finally arrived, they were thrilled to see that the house was even more charming than they had imagined. It was a 2-story, white-painted home with a wraparound porch and large windows that offered stunning views of the ocean. The lighthouse, standing tall and majestic, added a touch of historical intrigue to the setting. The family quickly settled into the house. The kids explored the rooms excitedly, while John and Mary unpacked and prepared for their week-long stay. That evening, they had a delightful dinner on the porch, watching the sun set over the water. The lighthouse, silhouetted against the sky, looked beautiful and mysterious, casting long shadows across the beach. As night fell, the family gathered in the living room to play board games and chat. The atmosphere was cozy and relaxed, filled with laughter and warmth. They went to bed that night feeling happy and content, ready to enjoy their vacation to the fullest. The next morning, the family woke up early and decided to spend the day exploring the beach. The kids built sandcastles and collected seashells, while John and Mary enjoyed a leisurely walk along the shore. It was a perfect day, with clear skies and a gentle breeze. In the afternoon, they returned to the house for lunch. As they sat down to eat, Billy mentioned that he had seen something strange near the lighthouse. "I saw someone standing by the lighthouse," he said, his eyes wide with curiosity. "But when I looked again, they were gone." John and Mary exchanged puzzled glances. "Are you sure?" John asked. "The lighthouse has been abandoned for years. There's no one there." Billy nodded emphatically. "I'm sure, Dad. I saw them." Anna, always the skeptic, rolled her eyes. "Maybe you just imagined it, Billy. It's probably just your imagination." But Billy was insistent. "No, I saw someone. Maybe we should go check it out." John, curious but not overly concerned, agreed to take a look. "All right, let's go see," he said. The family walked over to the lighthouse, which stood about 100 yards from the house. The structure was old and weathered, with peeling paint and broken windows. It had an eerie, abandoned feel to it, but there was no sign of anyone around. They explored the area for a bit, but found nothing unusual. "See, Billy? There's no one here," John said, patting his son on the shoulder. "It was probably just a trick of the light." Billy looked unconvinced, but he didn't argue. They returned to the house and tried to put the incident out of their minds. But that night, as they were getting ready for bed, strange things began to happen. Anna was the first to notice. As she was brushing her teeth, she heard faint whispers coming from the hallway. She paused, listening intently, but the whispers stopped. Shaking her head, she dismissed it as her imagination and went to bed. Later that night, John and Mary were awoken by the sound of footsteps echoing through the house. John got up to investigate, but found nothing out of place. The house was silent, and the kids were fast asleep. He returned to bed, feeling uneasy. The next day, more strange occurrences followed. Objects seemed to move on their own, doors creaked open and closed, and there were cold drafts that came out of nowhere. The family tried to ignore these events, attributing them to the old house's quirks. But as the days passed, the activity became more pronounced and harder to dismiss. Determined to find out more about the history of the lighthouse, John decided to visit the local historical society. He hoped to find some records or stories that might explain the strange events they were experiencing. Mary accompanied him, leaving the kids at the house under strict instructions to stay together and stay inside. The Historical Society was a small, dusty building filled with old books, photographs, and artifacts. The curator, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, greeted them warmly. John explained their situation and asked if she knew anything about the lighthouse. Mrs. Henderson nodded, her expression turning serious. "The old lighthouse has a dark history," she said. "It was built in the early 1800s, and was manned by a series of lighthouse keepers over the years. But one keeper, in particular, stands out. She led them to a back room where she pulled out an old, weathered book. His name was Thomas Hargrove, she said, opening the book to a page with a faded photograph of a stern-looking man. He was the lighthouse keeper from 1895 to 1910. It said that he was a solitary man, dedicated to his duty, but tragedy struck one stormy night. John and Mary listened intently as Mrs. Henderson recounted the tale. During a terrible storm, Thomas's wife and young daughter were visiting him. The storm was so fierce that it caused a ship to crash into the rocks. Thomas, his wife, and his daughter all perished in the tragedy. Their bodies were never recovered. Mary shuddered. That's awful. Do you think his spirit might be haunting the lighthouse? Mrs. Henderson nodded slowly. Many people believe so. There have been numerous reports of strange occurrences around the lighthouse ever since. Whispers, footsteps, shadows moving in the windows, just like what you described. John and Mary exchanged worried glances. What can we do? John asked. We can't just leave. We have another week here. Mrs. Henderson offered a sympathetic smile. I don't know if there's much you can do. The spirits are restless, tied to the place by their tragic end. But if you respect their space and try not to disturb them, they might leave you alone. Armed with this new information, John and Mary returned to the vacation home. They shared the story with Anna and Billy, who listened with a mixture of fascination and fear. They decided to follow Mrs. Henderson's advice and tried to go about their vacation without disturbing the lighthouse or its surroundings. For a couple of days, things seemed to calm down. The strange occurrences lessened, and the family began to relax again. They spent their days on the beach, enjoying the sun and the sea, and their evenings playing games and watching movies. It almost felt like things were returning to normal. But the peace was short-lived. One stormy night, just like the one in Mrs. Henderson's story, everything changed. The wind howled outside, and rain pounded against the windows. The family huddled together in the living room, watching a movie to distract themselves from the storm. Suddenly, the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. Billy screamed, and Mary quickly lit some candles to provide light. It's okay, Billy. It's just a power outage, she said, trying to calm him down. But deep down, she felt a sense of dread. John checked the fuse box, but there was nothing he could do. The storm was too severe. They decided to wait it out and hope the power would come back soon. As they sat in the dim candlelight, the strange occurrences began again, only this time, they were much more intense. They heard whispers coming from all directions, growing louder and more insistent. The temperature in the room dropped suddenly, and they could see their breath in the cold air. Anna clutched her mother's arm, her eyes wide with fear. Mom, what's happening? Before Mary could answer, the footsteps started. Heavy, deliberate steps echoed through the house, coming closer and closer. John grabbed a flashlight and shone it towards the hallway, but there was nothing there. Everyone, stay together, John said, his voice shaking. We need to get out of here. They hurried to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if an unseen force was holding it shut. Panic set in as they realized they were trapped. The whispers grew louder, and the footsteps were now accompanied by the sound of someone or something scraping against the walls. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to come alive, moving and shifting around them. Suddenly, a ghostly figure appeared at the top of the stairs. It was a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothes with a stern expression and eyes that seemed to pierce through them. It was Thomas Hargrove. He started down the stairs, each step deliberate and menacing. The family backed away, huddling together, terrified of what he might do. Just as Thomas reached the bottom of the stairs, the whispers stopped, and the figure vanished. The front door flew open with a bang, and the storm outside seemed to momentarily subside. John didn't waste a second. Let's go, now, he shouted, and the family rushed out of the house, running through the rain towards their car. The family drove to the nearest hotel, soaked and shaken from their encounter. They spent the night in a single room, huddled together, too scared to sleep. The storm continued to rage outside, but they felt safer being away from the haunted house. The next morning, they contacted the rental agency and explained what had happened. The agency was sympathetic but skeptical. They agreed to refund the rest of their stay and help them find another place to stay for the remainder of their vacation. John, Mary, Anna, and Billy spent the rest of their trip in a small but comfortable beachside motel. They tried to enjoy the rest of their vacation, but the events at the haunted house cast a shadow over their experience. They couldn't stop thinking about Thomas Hargrove and the tragic story of the lighthouse. When they returned home, they did their best to move on with their lives. They talked about their experience only occasionally, and always with a sense of disbelief and unease. The haunted lighthouse remained a dark and mysterious chapter in their lives. Years passed, and the Thompson family slowly put the events of that summer behind them. But the memory of the haunted lighthouse never fully faded. One day, John received a call from Mrs. Henderson, the curator of the Historical Society. She had some new information that she thought might interest him. Curious, John agreed to meet her. Mrs. Henderson greeted him warmly and led him to a back room where she had laid out some old documents and photographs. "I've been doing some more research on Thomas Hargrove and the lighthouse," she said. "I believe I've found something that might explain why his spirit is so restless." She showed John a series of old letters and diary entries from Thomas Hargrove. They revealed a man who was deeply grieving the loss of his family and consumed with guilt. In one entry, Thomas wrote about how he believed the storm that night was a punishment for some unknown sin, and that he was cursed to remain at the lighthouse forever, watching over the place where his family had died. John read the entries with a heavy heart. So he's trapped there because of his guilt and grief. Mrs. Henderson nodded. "It seems so. Perhaps if his spirit could find some peace, the haunting might stop." John thanked her for the information and left, his mind racing. He shared the new details with his family, and they decided to make one last trip to the lighthouse, hoping to find a way to help Thomas Hargrove find peace. The Thompson family returned to the vacation home, now abandoned and in disrepair. They made their way to the lighthouse, carrying flowers and a small memorial plaque for Thomas Hargrove and his family. They placed the plaque at the base of the lighthouse and arranged the flowers around it. John read aloud from one of Thomas's diary entries, expressing his sorrow and regret. "Thomas Hargrove, we understand your pain and your loss," John said, his voice filled with emotion. "We hope that you can find peace and move on from this place." As they stood in silence, a gentle breeze blew through the air, and the sun broke through the clouds, casting a warm light over the lighthouse. The family felt a sense of calm and relief, as if a great weight had been lifted. They left the lighthouse, feeling that they had done something meaningful. The haunting may not have been completely resolved, but they hoped that their gesture had helped Thomas Hargrove find some semblance of peace. The Thompson family returned home, their hearts lighter. They knew they would never forget their encounter with the haunted lighthouse, but they felt a sense of closure and a newfound appreciation for the power of compassion and understanding. It was the beginning of summer, and four friends, Mark, Lisa, Rachel, and Jake, had planned a beach getaway to escape the stresses of their daily lives. They chose a secluded beach known for its crystal clear waters and vibrant marine life, perfect for their favorite pastime, scuba diving. The group arrived at the beach house they had rented, a charming wooden cabin nestled among palm trees and overlooking the ocean. The air was filled with the scent of salt and the sound of waves crashing against the shore. They unpacked their gear, eager to explore the underwater world that awaited them. Mark, the most experienced diver of the group, had planned the first dive for the following morning. They spent the evening relaxing on the porch, sharing stories and laughter under the starlit sky. The anticipation of the adventure ahead filled them with excitement. The next morning, the group was up early, energized by the prospect of their first dive. They donned their wetsuits, checked their equipment, and made their way to the beach. The water was calm and inviting, with visibility so clear they could see the sandy bottom even from the shore. Mark led the way, with Lisa, Rachel, and Jake following closely behind. They swam out to a coral reef not far from the beach, marveling at the colorful fish and vibrant coral formations. It was a diver's paradise, and they were thrilled to be experiencing it together. As they explored the reef, something caught Mark's eye. He gestured for the others to follow him and swam towards a deeper part of the reef. There, in the shadows, he saw a figure, a diver in an old-fashioned diving suit, the kind with a brass helmet and weighted boots. Mark's first thought was that it must be some sort of underwater display or artifact, but as they got closer, the figure moved. The diver turned to face them, and through the small, round window of the helmet, Mark could see a pair of eyes staring back at him. Mark felt a chill run down his spine. He signaled for the group to surface, and they quickly swam up, breaking through the water's surface with a collective gasp. "What was that?" Rachel asked. her voice trembling. "I don't know," Mark replied, breathing heavily. "It looked like an old-fashioned diver." "Did you see his eyes?" Lisa nodded, her face pale. "Yeah, I saw them. It was creepy." Jake, always the skeptic, shrugged. "Maybe it's just some kind of underwater attraction. Let's check it out." Reluctantly, the group agreed to dive back down. They returned to the spot where they had seen the diver, but he was gone. They searched the area thoroughly but found no trace of him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Feeling uneasy, they decided to call it a day and swam back to shore. As they walked back to the beach house, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. That evening, the group sat on the porch, discussing their strange encounter. They decided to do some research on the area, hoping to find an explanation for what they had seen. Lisa, who had a knack for finding information online, discovered an old newspaper article about a diver named Captain James Avery. According to the article, Captain Avery had been a treasure hunter who disappeared in the area in the early 1900s while searching for a sunken ship. His body was never found, and his disappearance remained a mystery. "This has to be connected," Lisa said, showing the article to the others. "Maybe we saw his ghost." Mark shook his head. "I don't know, Lisa. Ghosts aren't real. There has to be a logical explanation." Rachel, who had been quiet since their dive, finally spoke up. "Whatever it was, I think we should be careful. Something about this doesn't feel right." The group agreed to stay close to the shore the next day and avoid diving too deep. They tried to enjoy the rest of the evening, but an air of unease lingered over them. The following morning, the friends decided to explore a different part of the reef, hoping to avoid any further encounters with the mysterious diver. They stayed in shallower waters, admiring the marine life and trying to relax. But as they swam, they couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every so often, Mark would catch a glimpse of a shadow moving in the distance, but when he turned to look, there was nothing there. Suddenly, Lisa tapped Mark on the shoulder and pointed towards the deeper part of the reef. There, partially hidden by the coral, was the figure of the diver. He stood motionless, watching them with those same piercing eyes. Fear gripped Mark. He signaled for the group to surface, and they quickly swam up. Once on the surface, they floated together, their hearts pounding. "We have to get out of here," Rachel said, her voice shaking. Mark nodded. "Let's head back." As they swam towards the shore, the diver followed them, his movements slow and deliberate. It was as if he was herding them, ensuring they left his domain. Back at the beach house, the friends were on edge. They knew they had to find out more about the mysterious diver. Lisa continued her research, diving deeper into the history of Captain James Avery. She found more articles and records detailing Avery's obsession with finding the lost treasure of the sunken ship. According to the legend, the ship had been carrying a fortune in gold and jewels, and Avery had been determined to claim it for himself. As the story went, Avery had made several unsuccessful attempts to locate the wreck before finally vanishing without a trace. Some believed he had drowned, while others speculated that he had found the treasure and disappeared to enjoy his newfound wealth in secret. But there was another, darker theory, one that sent chills down Lisa's spine. According to local folklore, the treasure was cursed, and anyone who sought it would be doomed to wander the ocean for eternity. Those who had encountered the phantom diver claimed he was the spirit of Captain Avery, trapped between worlds, forever searching for the treasure he could never possess. Lisa shared her findings with the group, and they listened in stunned silence. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but it only made the situation more terrifying. "We need to leave," Rachel said. "This isn't safe." Mark agreed. "We'll pack up and head out first thing in the morning." That night, the friends tried to sleep, but the events of the past few days weighed heavily on their minds. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore seemed louder, more ominous, and the wind howled through the trees, creating an eerie atmosphere. In the middle of the night, Mark was awoken by a noise outside. He got up and looked out the window, his heart pounding. In the moonlight, he saw the figure of the diver standing on the beach, staring up at the house. Mark's blood ran cold. He quickly woke the others, and they gathered by the window, watching in horror as the diver began to walk towards the house. "We need to get out of here," now Mark whispered urgently. They grabbed their belongings and hurried out the back door, hoping to avoid the diver. As they made their way to the car, they could hear the sound of heavy footsteps behind them, growing closer. Just as they reached the car, the diver appeared in front of them, blocking their path. His eyes were filled with sorrow and desperation, and he reached out towards them, as if pleading for help. Mark, his voice trembling, spoke to the apparition. "What do you want?" The diver didn't respond, but the air grew colder, and they could feel his presence pressing down on them. In a moment of clarity, Lisa remembered the legend of the cursed treasure and realized what they needed to do. "Captain Avery," she said, stepping forward, "we know about the treasure. We understand your pain. Please let us go. We can help you find peace." The diver's expression softened, and for a moment, the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Then, with a slow nod, he vanished into the night, leaving the friends standing there, shaken but unharmed. The next morning, the friends left the beach house, grateful to be alive. They decided to cut their vacation short and return home, vowing never to speak of their encounter with the phantom diver again. As they drove away, they couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness for Captain Avery, trapped between worlds, forever searching for the treasure that had cost him his life. They hoped that, in some way, their acknowledgement of his story had brought him a measure of peace. In the years that followed, the friends remained close, bonded by their shared experience. They continued to dive, but they were always cautious, respectful of the ocean and its many mysteries. They knew that some things were best left undisturbed, and that the past had a way of reaching out to those who dared to uncover its secrets. And though they never returned to that secluded beach, they would always remember the phantom diver and the lesson he had taught them that some treasures are not worth the cost, and some spirits can only find peace when their stories are told. If you want to see more horror stories, please like the video, share your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Stay with us, thank you, and see you in the next videos.